Okay, week 3. I got to tell you, I think this week 3 information is some of the more interesting info. I think it's the type of material that folks can really reflect on and think about because they've experienced a lot of this, particularly when we get into selection. Week 3, I guess we could best summarize it as staffing a company. And two particular things we're going to look at are recruitment and selection. The first one here is recruitment. Recruitment is generating a pool of qualified applicants. Generating a pool of qualified applicants. So if someone in your HR department comes to you and says, "Hey boss, I just put out an ad for a job and we have 10,000 people who've applied." Well, that person may be really proud of what they've done, but they probably did not do a good job. Because if you have 10,000 people who applied for a job, chances are that is not a qualified pool. Well, what did that person do wrong? Well, it's hard to tell. They may not have done anything wrong, but chances are what they did is they put an ad in CareerBuilder or Monster.com or something like that. And what they did is they were extremely vague in their recruiting ad. In other words, they said things like, well, we're looking for a motivated, self-starter, team player, blah, blah, blah. That may sound like good stuff to put in an ad, but if that's all you have in a recruitment ad, you have not done a very good job, because most anyone thinks they would fit those criteria, right? Most anyone thinks, okay, well, I'm a team player, and I'm a self-starter, and I'm motivated. What you really want to do when you recruit is you want to be very specific. You want to be very specific when you place recruitment ads about the types of KSAs and skills that are needed, the types of tasks that will be performed. You want a potential applicant to be the first person to do the screening. You want them to screen themselves out if they know that a job doesn't fit them. Now we know inevitably there's still going to be people who will apply for a job even if they don't really fit the description. But still, you want some people at least to take themselves out of the running. So that's what recruitment is. Recruitment is not about getting a large pool of candidates. It is about a large pool of qualified candidates. Okay, and then from that pool, obviously, we will select, we'll hire. Well, you see there, recruitment can be divided into external sources, and you shall see a little bit lower, we have internal sources. Well, the external sources, pretty self-explanatory there. We've got the list of 6 different ones, and we say the number 6 is media, and that would be, your newspaper, your online sources, etc. Advantages of these external sources. The advantage, one that is often cited, is that it's a new perspective, right? You're bringing people from different companies who've done the job before. They have a new perspective. Another advantage is this idea that it's cheaper and faster than training. If you can bring someone in who's done the job before, then they know how to do it. You don't have to train somebody from inside the company. Now, as you're going to hear from me in a second, I am a big proponent of hiring and promoting from within. So I think that sometimes this new perspectives thing can get really overblown, and we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Disadvantages. The person may know the job, but they may not fit with the culture of your company. You need to be very, very careful with that one. You actually could be breaking the law, believe it or not, if you don't hire someone purely on this. Because if you don't hire someone, let's say that the person you choose not to hire is of a different faith, or and you or maybe they're older, or a particular racial group, and you say, well, we didn't hire them because they didn't fit with our culture. Well, if they're very qualified for the job, if they truly have the knowledge, skills, and abilities, and they're experienced, and your only reason for not hiring them is they didn't fit with the culture of your company, the courts may not look on that very favorably. So you really need to be careful with this whole fit with culture and not necessarily use that as a reason not to hire someone. Morale problems. Obviously, if you're bringing in people from the outside and you're passing over people inside the company, that certainly could lead to morale problems. And then lastly, adjustment. Person may know how to do a particular job, but they don't know the particular policies of your company. Internal sources, and I think a couple of these on here are kind of silly. I don't really know how they're internal sources, but nevertheless, present employees, friends of employees, former employees, and previous applicants. These are folks that you somehow have contact through the inside of your company. Obviously, present employees you can contact, they're inside your company. Friends of employees, you can get referrals through current employees, former employees, and previous applicants. I do agree that those are all internal sources, but as you see here below, some of these advantages and disadvantages don't really apply to all of these. I think the advantages and disadvantages mostly are applying to present employees. I don't necessarily know they apply to these other threes per se. So what are the advantages of hiring present employees, promoting present employees? Obviously morale. Number 2 is huge, and we'll talk about this a little bit more here in a little bit when we get to selection. Better assessment of abilities. When you hire someone from the outside, so many times you do not know what you're getting. It doesn't matter how wonderful someone looks in the interview. Oftentimes they can be a disaster because you really don't know what you're getting until they get into the company. Obviously lower cost when you don't have to do ads, etc. And then lastly, motivation. If people in the company know that they can climb the ladder, if they know that your company will look inside first, that certainly can be motivating. Disadvantages of internal recruiting. Inbreeding. This is oftentimes talked about as a disadvantage of internal recruiting. This idea that if you don't bring in outsiders, if all you're ever doing is promoting from within, I think inbreeding can be a problem, potentially. I mean, certainly if you're always promoting from within and you insulate yourself from the outside world, it could be a problem, but not necessarily. Don't just automatically assume that inbreeding is a problem. You need to go through, talk to your current employees, give them a fair chance. And if in the interview process and in the selection process, they don't appear to have new ideas, they don't appear to be able to have anything to offer, then look outside. But give them a fair shake. You may have people in your company that have every bit the ideas. They've just never been in a position, right? They've never been in management. They've never been an executive, and so they've never had a chance to express those new ideas. They've never had the freedom or the authority to do it. So just be careful with inbreeding. Don't automatically write people off because of inbreeding. You know your employees better. Obviously in a company you know what they're capable of and they're not capable of in many cases. But just don't automatically say this must be an external hire. You're really doing people a disservice. How can organizations more effectively recruit protected classes? Basically, make it a priority. If you truly want to be a diverse organization, if that is a goal of yours, then just make it a priority to recruit protected classes. Be mindful of how you recruit, where you recruit. It's honestly not rocket science. It's just there's been many companies in the past who have been called to the carpet for not recruiting protected classes, and they'll throw their hands up and say, well, what do you mean? It's not our fault people aren't showing up. But honestly, the courts can see to that pretty quickly. The courts can say, well, what have you done to recruit protected classes? And those companies, in many cases, have not been able to show that they've really taken any steps. Selection. So once we have this pool of applicants, we must select from that pool the best possible candidates for the job. A little equation you see here that performance equals ability times motivation times context. Basically, an individual's performance on the job is a function of their ability. In other words, they have the KSAs. Are they motivated? And context. Well, context is what we as the organization provide. Do we provide proper tools, resources, etc.? So honestly, when we're hiring someone, we're not really concerned about context. When we're hiring people, we're concerned about ability and motivation. And so we have to find ways to assess these two, ability and motivation. In many cases, in most cases, quite honestly, motivation is by far the most difficult to assess. It is in many cases very, very difficult in the interview process to determine if someone's motivated. Just because they talk a good game, just because they seem energetic in the interview, does not necessarily mean that they're motivated. Okay, selection tools must be reliable. We've talked about that before. And they also must be valid. We've talked about content validity and criterion-related validity earlier. Construct validity simply means, does the measure what it says it does? If we say it's measuring math ability, is it really measuring math ability? Well, here are some of the different tools, if you will. I'm not going to go through all of these in detail. Letters of recommendation. Many companies use letters of recommendation. Occasionally they can be useful, but quite honestly, in many cases, letters of recommendation are not great at differentiating top performers from low performers. If anything, what a letter of recommendation measures is how good of writers you know. So this applicant happens to know 3 people who can write really good letters. But it really, in many cases, not all cases, in many cases, doesn't truly help differentiate folks. Sometimes it does. Application form, obviously, is just a good standard form where you get all the information in one place. You can get it in a very sort of succinct way. Probably the most important aspect of an application form is that the applicant signs the application form, just attesting that the information's true. Also, by signing the application form, they typically give you, as the organization, the right to then do a background check or contact references, etc. Aptitude tests, basically you can think of these as intelligence tests. These are actually typically good predictors. However, in many cases you see there it's best to use work sample tests. Personality test. Many companies these days have gotten really cute trying to use different personality tests. And as I say there, be careful. If you are going to measure a person's personality and use personality as a means to hire someone, you need to make sure that you have validated it, right? Just like we talked with Griggs versus Duke Power. Remember in the Griggs versus Duke Power, they started selecting people based on high school diploma. Well, if you're going to start hiring certain personality types, you need to make sure that personality type that you're hiring is job related, right? That a type, L personality is better than a type M personality. You need to make sure you validated that. Interviews, your book does a really good job talking about interviews. Most companies would claim that they are that interviews are their bread and butter selection tool. And while interviews can be very effective, we also know that the folks who are doing the interviews are in many cases very subjective, and oftentimes their subjectivity is influenced by very subtle things, such as how well dressed the interviewee is, the attractiveness of the interviewee, and while those things might be somewhat important, oftentimes they are not related to performance. And so you may end up hiring someone who talks really good, who looks really good, who is great in an interview, and who can't do a job. And so you really need to be careful in the interview that you are truly asking questions that help reveal whether this person has the necessary KSAs. Are your questions asking this person to reveal information that will help you assess if they have KSAs and help assess if they're motivated? Assessment centers, you can kind of think of this as like the show The Apprentice. In The Apprentice, Trump has different folks go through all these different simulations, right? They have to do different marketing plans and put on different projects and things of that nature. At the end of the show, he selects his person, whoever wins the show. Well, that's kind of what an assessment center is. You, in hiring a person for your company, have the applicants go through a variety of different procedures, if you will, different tests. At the end of those different tests, right, a role play, maybe impromptu speaking, they have to do a case study, a business plan, a marketing plan, whatever the case may be. after they go through all those different assessments, you generally have a good feel for who the best all-around individual is. A drug test, obviously, can be used. If a person fails a drug test, that's probably a good indicator that they won't be a good, reliable employee. That's not always the case, obviously. Believe it or not, an honesty test. You can give an honesty test. You typically cannot use polygraphs, but you can use an honesty test, which is a variety of questions a person answers. They are not perfect, but they are surprisingly good. The way they typically work, they work in a variety of ways, but one of the ways they work is they ask a lot of the same questions, but ask them in different ways. And they're computerized, so once you've answered a question, it disappears. You can't check it. If you've been honest throughout the assessment, and you've been answering honestly, it's easy to keep your story straight. But if you have been making things up, you start tripping over your answers. Reference checks. Obviously, one of the best ways to get information on an applicant is to talk to their previous employer. But as we know nowadays, many companies refuse to give out that information. Many companies, because they're fearful of being sued, will not give out information on previous previous employees. And so it can be really difficult to get information through reference checks these days. I will say this, I don't want to spend too much time on it, but those companies that refuse to give out information, all they do is, those companies that do nothing but give out employment dates, are being a little too cautious. You are allowed to give out information on previous applicants as long as that information is truthful. So if you call a company, if that company directs you to the HR department and the HR department reads out of the employee's files, as long as that information is truthful, documented information, that company cannot be sued. So we have a lot of companies nowadays that are just going way overboard by only giving out dates of employment. Companies are allowed to give out much more than that, but they're just being extremely cautious, and we're such a litigious society that I guess I can understand why companies would be afraid. Last but not least, credit checks. More and more companies are doing credit checks on applicants. Their idea is that if a person has a bad credit history, then that may be indicative that they're not responsible. That I'll let you decide whether or not you think that's appropriate or not. We also have some states that are now passing laws that are banning this practice. And so we have more and more companies that are doing credit checks, but as a result, we now have more and more states that are saying, you can't do that. And so you need to be careful before you start doing credit checks to make sure your state allows that. As you see there, in general, it's best to use multiple selection tools. No one selection tool can reveal whether this person has the KSAs. Alrighty. Well, very good. Hope this helps.